By early 1918, the British feared a Turkish push through Persia could reach India, and oil-rich Baku was slipping from Allied hands. The War Office responded with a radical experiment, a 350-man mission deep into chaos. They called it Dunsterforce. A prototype Special Operations Force. In January 1918, the British War Office created a unique military formation, one of the earliest examples of a modern combined Special Operations Force. Known as Dunsterforce, it was officially designated the British Military Mission to the Caucasus. Composed of around 350 carefully selected officers and NCOs, Dunsterforce was assembled to conduct a covert and politically sensitive mission across northern Persia and the Caucasus. Their objective was ambitious: to organise and lead a coalition of Armenian, Assyrian, Georgian and anti-Bolshevik factions against the rising threats posed by Ottoman expansionism and Bolshevik control. Collapse on the Caucasian front. The geopolitical context was one of rapid disintegration. After the Bolshevik seizure of power during the October Revolution in 1917, Russian forces along the Caucasus front, which had until then pinned down the Ottoman Empire's eastern armies, began to collapse. Troops deserted in droves, and the fragile Transcaucasian government struggled to maintain cohesion. The British command, particularly in Mesopotamia, feared that a Turkish advance through the South Caucasus and Persia would threaten British India and the vital oil installations at Baku. To preempt this, the War Office gave Major General Lionel Charles Dunsterville, a decorated officer of Indian Army background, command of this experimental force. Long before his celebrated exploits in the Caucasus, Lionel Dunsterville had already entered literary legend as the inspiration for Stokey, the cunning, rebellious schoolboy in Rudyard Kipling's 1899 novel Stokey and Co. The two were classmates at the United Services College in Devon, where Kipling gave Dunsterville the enduring nickname. Their friendship lasted a lifetime, and Kipling's portrayal captured the real Dunsterville's sharp mind and taste for mischief, traits that would soon define his command of the Dunsterforce mission. So then, Stokey's orders, summarised here, were to secure Baku, protect the Trans-Caucasus Railway, and stabilise the region by supporting friendly national movements, particularly in Armenia and Georgia. Arming the East. Organising an irregular army. To achieve these objectives, Dunsterforce was instructed to rally and train irregular units composed of local ethnic militias and political factions. These included the Armenian Revolutionary Federation, or Dashnak Suchin, Assyrian volunteers under leaders like Aga Petros, and Caucasian Cossack units loyal to anti-Bolshevik commanders, such as General Bicherukov. The mission was fraught with risk. The political loyalties of local groups were fluid, and the British had little intelligence on whom to trust. Dunsterville also carried political authority with latitude to assist in the foundation of independent, pro-Allied nations in the Caucasus. This was part of a larger imperial strategy to form a cordon sanitaire against Bolshevik expansion and Ottoman penetration eastward towards Central Asia and India. An elite corps with a special mission. At its peak, Dunsterforce numbered around 1,000 personnel, all drawn from volunteer officers and senior NCOs across the British Empire. Recruited from Western Front divisions and Middle East campaigns, these men were chosen not just for military merit, but for their adaptability, stamina, and leadership in irregular warfare. As Dunsterville described in his 1920 memoir, Adventures of Dunsterforce, candidates needed strong character and adventurous spirit, capable of organising, training, and eventually leading irregular troops. Among the members were officers from the 14th King's Hussars, companies from the Hampshires and the North Staffordshire Regiment, Australian Light Horse, New Zealand Mounted Rifles, Canadian infantry and Indian Army units. Engineers, intelligence officers and mechanics were included, along with a small number of interpreters and medical personnel. First movements, the advance parties. Before the main body set out, 2 advance detachments were dispatched. On 24 January, a small force under Major Bartlett, DSO, and Captain Goldsmith in several cars with a single Rolls-Royce armoured car escort, commanded by Lieutenant Singer, was sent ahead with orders to reach Hamadan and secure petrol supplies along the route. Then, on 27 January 1918, Dunsterville's advance party departed Baghdad in 41 Ford vans, crossing the snowbound Asadabad Pass and continuing north through Kermanshah, Hamadan and Kazvin. Travelling without infantry support, the convoy relied on its drivers armed with rifles, a single Lewis gun, and the use of speed, diplomacy and ready cash, British sovereigns and Persian silver, to secure local cooperation. At Kermanshah, the group encountered and allied with a detachment of Caucasian Cossacks under General Lazar Bicherikov, a fiercely anti-Bolshevik commander who would become a key, if unpredictable, ally in later months. But even reaching the Caspian would prove more dangerous than expected. Setback at Enzelli. The advance party reached Enzelli on the Caspian Sea by 19 February 1918, intending to secure shipping to cross to Baku. Instead, they found the port under the control of a Bolshevik garrison composed of Red Guards and pro-Soviet sailors, who now dominated the Caspian coastline. The British were denied passage and warned that any attempt to interfere in Transcaucasian affairs would be viewed as hostile. Meanwhile, news reached them that Soviet Russia had signed a ceasefire with the Ottoman Empire, undercutting the very rationale of their presence. Recognising the mounting danger, General Dunsterville ordered a withdrawal to Hamadan, arriving back on 25 February. They had departed Enzelli just in time. A detachment of Red Guards was dispatched from Baku shortly afterward, with explicit orders from the Soviet Committee to detain the British officers and escort them back to Baku for questioning. Hearts, Minds and Skirmishes. The following months were spent in and around Hamadan, where Dunsterforce operated as both military advisors and humanitarian coordinators. By May-June 1918, the main body of Dunsterforce, including the London contingent, had completed its journey from Baghdad to Hamadan. Infantry elements of the 39th Infantry Brigade, including men from the North Staffordshire Regiment and Worcestershire Regiment, were joined by a troop from the 14th King's Hussars, machine gun sections, and a small field artillery component. Much of the journey had to be completed on foot or with mule trains over mountainous terrain, often at altitudes exceeding 2,000 metres. These reinforcements would prove critical in the months to come as the focus shifted back to the Caspian and the fight for Baku. Thus reinforced, Dunsterforce set about organising local self-defence forces among Armenians and Assyrians, distributed food and essential supplies, and launched civil engineering efforts to restore water systems and rebuild roads. A severe famine was ravaging western Persia, the result of years of depredation by Turkish and Persian troops, now worsened by the greed of local speculative traders. Starvation was widespread, and reports of cannibalism in Hamadan shocked even hardened veterans. In response, Dunsterforce initiated a large-scale relief program, employing local Persians in public works projects, particularly road construction, to provide both income and long-term infrastructure. Local communities were initially wary. Many associated foreign soldiers with the chaos of previous Russian and Turkish occupations. But the British effort to restore order and alleviate suffering gradually shifted public perception. Units under men like Captain William Leith Ross carried out frequent patrols into the surrounding mountains, fending off Kurdish bandits and pro-Turkish tribes, especially around Bijar. A combination of military discipline and humanitarian outreach helped stabilise this volatile region, at least temporarily. Dunsterforce also operated a primitive intelligence network to intercept Turkish or Bolshevik agents passing through northwest Persia, often disguised as traders or pilgrims. Securing the road to Resht. In early June 1918, Dunsterforce moved its base to Kazvin. A key development was the arrival of a detachment from the Dunsterforce Armoured Car Brigade, nicknamed Dun Cars, as it neared Kazvin. These were mainly Austin armoured cars, formerly part of the Royal Naval Air Service and previously deployed in Russia, tasked with securing supply lines and supporting operations toward the Caspian. In total, Dunsterforce would receive around 20 Austins, supplemented by a few Rolls-Royce armoured cars already in theatre. However, the vehicles struggled in the harsh Persian climate. Tyres designed for Russian winters hardened in the heat, leading to broken axles, while chronic shortages of spare parts in Mesopotamia further crippled mobility. These issues soon reduced the number of operational Austins to just 8. By mid-June, orders had shifted towards securing a path to Baku, but uncertainty remained among British High Command over how sustainable that operation would be. Dunsterville had to proceed amid mixed political signals and strategic ambiguity. The Menjil Bridge Clash. When talks with the Jangali leader Kuchik Khan failed, Dunsterforce launched a coordinated push toward Resht. Leading the column was a composite force including Bicherikov's Cossacks, a squadron of the 14th King's Hussars, 2 British armoured cars, Russian mountain artillery and 2 aircraft. The key obstacle was the Menjil Bridge, a vital crossing halfway to the Caspian and defended by around 2,000 Jangali fighters and machine guns. Despite the enemy's numbers, their positions were poorly chosen. In a bold display of discipline and coordination, Bicherikov's cavalry dislodged an enemy outpost without firing a shot, simply by charging and shouting. A brief truce was offered by German officer von Paschen, but quickly rejected. With the enemy distracted, the Russian artillery opened fire. The armoured cars attacked from the flank, and infantry advanced. This combined assault shattered the Jangali lines, who fled across the bridge under pressure, with many captured during the pursuit to Resht. It was a textbook example of how a small, well-led and well-coordinated force could rout a much larger one. Bicherikov pushed on to Enzelli, leaving detachments to hold key points along the route. Captain A.V. Darky Pope's Hussars secured Menjil Bridge. At this stage, it's worth noting that back in Baghdad, the strategic picture surrounding Dunsterforce was becoming increasingly strained. Lieutenant General William Rain Marshall, commander of the Mesopotamian Expeditionary Force, or MEF, viewed Dunsterville's advance into the Caucasus as overly ambitious and strategically unwise. He feared it would overextend British forces beyond Mesopotamia and entangle them in uncertain political and military commitments. This led to a power struggle over authority, supplies, and objectives, with Marshall resisting requests for reinforcements and support. The resulting tension and lack of coordination delayed operations, limited resources, and ultimately undermined Dunsterforce's ability to hold key ground, particularly at Baku. Matthews' column. Now, returning to events in northern Persia, High Command in Baghdad dispatched Matthews' column, a mixed battalion of Hampshires and Gurkhas, along with 2 mountain guns from the 21st Kohat Battery. However, the Jangalis soon recovered and launched ambushes. On 18 June, a skirmish at Siarud killed Captain R.C. Durnford and wounded 6. A larger convoy was attacked on 21 June, but Lieutenant Geoffrey Watt of the ASC won the Military Cross for salvaging damaged vehicles under fire. By late June, the Gurkhas began hitting back. On 29 June, Captain Knightley Holler Cox led a successful Kukri assault at Imam Zadeh Hashim, earning his own Military Cross. While this helped blunt further ambushes, the Jangalis remained defiant, and fighting in Resht and the surrounding areas would continue through July. Meanwhile, with Turkish forces reported near Tabriz, Dunsterforce extended its patrols east of Miani, preparing for further operations in an increasingly volatile region. Massacre and Flight, the Urmia Crisis and Assyrian Tragedy. In July 1918, Dunsterforce authorised a relief mission aimed at assisting the Assyrian Christian population near Lake Urmia, who were under increasing threat from the advancing Ottoman 6th Army and allied Kurdish irregulars. A column under Major J.C. Moore departed from Bija, carrying £45,000 in silver, 12 Lewis guns, and 100,000 rounds of ammunition. The party included a squadron of the 14th King's Hussars and a group of Australians, rather notably Captain Stanley George Savage, who would go on to earn himself a DSO and a third mention in dispatches for his remarkable efforts during this operation. Their objective was to link up with Assyrian forces at a pre-arranged rendezvous point near the village of Sain Kala. But when they arrived on 23 July, the area was deserted. No reception party had come. With supplies dwindling, the cavalry withdrew, and Savage's smaller detachment chose to remain and press forward alone. By early August, it became clear that Urmia had fallen. Ottoman forces had captured the town, and in their wake came the mass flight of over 80,000 Assyrian and Armenian civilians. These included entire families, men, women and children, fleeing southward across rugged terrain in an attempt to reach British lines. On 5 August, Savage's group encountered the head of this refugee column. Some 24 kilometres, 15 miles further back at the tail end of the column stood Dr. William Ambrose Shedd, on a ridge overlooking the road. He was an American Presbyterian missionary with decades of service in Persia. Dr. Shedd, accompanied by just 24 armed Assyrian men, had remained with the column to hold off Kurdish and Iranian tribal raiders attacking the stragglers. Despite being sick, Shedd coordinated the defence, positioning his men and managing the line as best he could. His wife, Mary Shedd, moved among the civilians, encouraging the wounded and helping the elderly to keep moving. Their actions, though little known today, were instrumental in preventing the complete collapse of the retreat. Savage's team joined the rearguard, helping repel attackers from a looted village and reinforcing key positions along the trail. The situation within the column was deteriorating. Many able-bodied Assyrian men had rushed ahead to secure horses or supplies, leaving the vulnerable, particularly women and children, exposed to ambush. Aga Petros, the leading Assyrian commander, was unable to restore order. Over the course of several days, Savage's small party, supported by a handful of Assyrian volunteers, fought repeated engagements against mounted raiders. After 7 continuous hours of rearguard fighting, 12 hussars arrived to reinforce the line, followed by 50 Assyrian troops sent by Petros. These arrivals prevented the collapse of the rear and allowed the refugee column to continue its march. Charles Bean, the AIF's official historian, wrote that the stand made by Savage and his 8 companions that evening and during half of the next day against hundreds of the enemy thirsting like wolves to get at the defenceless throng was as fine as any episode known to the present writer in the history of this war. That night, Dr. Shedd succumbed to cholera in camp. He was buried beside the road he had defended, his grave marked by those he had refused to abandon. By 17 August, the remnants of the refugee column reached the town of Bija. Of the estimated 80,000 Assyrians who had fled the Urmia region, tens of thousands are thought to have perished during the ordeal. Many of the refugees eventually reached Hamadan, despite facing starvation, disease and relentless exhaustion along the way. There, British Army engineers established emergency camps and field hospitals to offer relief and medical care. Further south, near Bakwaba, outside Baghdad, Dunsterforce officers assisted in organising and training a brigade-sized Assyrian volunteer force, drawn from survivors and fighters led by commanders such as Aga Petros. Though a number of refugees were later resettled near Bakwaba and Mosul, The loss of their ancestral homeland in the north remained one of the most harrowing episodes of the First World War in the Middle East. With Urmia lost and the mission's fate hanging in the balance, Dunsterville set his course for Baku. Baku bound. Having secured Resht, Dunsterville returned to Enzelli on 28 July. The city now cleared of Bolshevik forces following a brief local uprising, and finally secured transport across the Caspian Sea aboard 3 aging Russian steamers, the President Kruger, Kursk and Abo. He landed with his men at Baku on August 4, 1918. Holding Baku, siege and internal discord. Baku was already under imminent threat when Dunsterforce arrived. The city's defenders were a fragile alliance known as the Centro-Caspian Dictatorship, a Menshevik socialist revolutionary coalition that had displaced the previous Bolshevik-led Baku Soviet in a coup. The local garrison of about 7,000 fighters included Armenian Dashnak militia, Russian socialist volunteers and remnants of pro-British groups. Dunsterville quickly established his headquarters in the Grand Hotel on Nikolaevsky Street and began coordinating the city's outer defences. His men dug trenches, sighted machine guns, and attempted to instill discipline in an army deeply fractured by ideological rivalries. Despite his efforts, the defenders were plagued by poor morale, a lack of unified command, and distrust between factions. Some Bolshevik-leaning elements even refused to cooperate, viewing the British as imperialist interlopers. To support the defence, Dunsterforce deployed his 2 Martinsyde G-100 Elephant fighter bombers, flown from a makeshift airfield outside the city by pilots of the Royal Air Force's Mesopotamian Half Flight. These aircraft conducted strafing runs and bombing sorties against Ottoman columns, advancing from Ganja and Shamkir. However, mechanical failures and lack of spares limited their impact. A city under fire. Fall of Baku. By 26 August, Nuri Pasha's Ottoman Azerbaijani Army of Islam had encircled Baku, concentrating infantry, cavalry and artillery west of the city in preparation for a major assault. The defenders, reinforced by British units, Armenian volunteers and remnants of the Centro-Caspian forces, held a perimeter focusing mainly along the peninsula's western flank. One strategic strongpoint, Mud Volcano, a low hill overlooking Lake Boyukshur, was initially held by D Company of the North Staffordshire Regiment, and later reinforced by a company from the 9th Worcestershire Regiment. On 26 August, Ottoman troops launched a coordinated attack on this position, with over 1,000 infantry supported by cavalry and artillery. The small British force repelled 4 or 5 successive assaults over several hours, but eventually lost all company officers and about 80 men, forcing a retreat and triggering the collapse of the entire 19-mile defensive line to inner trenches among the oil fields east of the volcano. Despite piecemeal reinforcements, including elements of the 39th Infantry Brigade, additional armoured cars, 1 artillery battery and 2 RAF Martinsyde aircraft, local Armenian and Russian units frequently broke under fire or failed to hold key sectors. And what, pray tell, of our old friend Colonel Lazar Becherikov and his Cossacks? Well, in late July 1918, the good colonel withdrew his detachment from Baku after clashing politically with the newly formed Centro-Caspian regime, removing his vital cavalry force just as the Ottoman advance was gathering momentum. Yet Becherikov didn't vanish entirely. After capturing the port of Petrovsk, roughly 120 miles north of Baku along the Caspian coast, he reversed course. Around 600 of his Cossacks were dispatched back south, arriving in early September. Their return came just in time to stiffen the city's defences ahead of the main Ottoman assault on the nights of 13-14 September. By 1 September, the Ottoman offensive escalated into full-scale assaults across multiple sectors. with especially fierce fighting centred on the strategic Wolf's Gate along the medieval city wall to the southwest. Embedded Armenian women, widowed or displaced, volunteered in the trenches, choosing to stand with defenders rather than remain unprotected behind the lines. Despite intermittent reinforcements, the defenders' morale deteriorated, desertions increased, and supplies dwindled. On 13-14 September, repeated Ottoman attacks almost overwhelmed Wolf's Gate, but a desperate counterattack by Dunsterforce troops temporarily held the position. Recognising the hopeless defensive situation, Major General Dunsterville ordered evacuation that evening. Under heavy bombardment and mounting panic, British and Commonwealth troops, along with thousands of Armenian civilians, embarked for Enzelli. Approximately 180 Allied personnel were killed, wounded or captured in Baku's defence, marking the end of Dunsterforce's Caucasus mission and a bitter Allied withdrawal into Persia. Strategic Withdrawal and Legacy. Though the Fall of Baku was a tactical defeat, it caused strategic hesitation in the Ottoman ranks. Believing Dunsterforce to be larger than it was, Turkish forces delayed advancing toward Persia, buying time for British operations in Mesopotamia. With the threat stalled and the mission's value diminished, the War Office disbanded Dunsterforce on 22 September 1918. Surviving members returned to their regiments or joined new missions like the Malison campaign in Transcaspia. Despite its limitations, Dunsterforce achieved a key goal, delaying Ottoman access to Baku's vital oil fields for 6 critical weeks. Lloyd George later credited this with weakening the Central Powers at a turning point in the war. When the Ottomans signed the Armistice of Mudros on 30 October, their grip on the Caucasus collapsed, and British forces re-entered Baku unopposed. Dunsterforce also foreshadowed modern special operations. Operating far from supply lines, its men carried out military, political, and humanitarian tasks under extreme conditions. Desert marches, mountain passes, and minimal communications. Though often viewed as outsiders, they left behind a legacy of adaptability and courage in one of the war's most remote theatres. I hope you enjoyed watching this episode on Dunsterforce. That's all for now. See you next time.